sister's a therapist and I tell jokes. We both want to help all kinds of folks.
Hello, and welcome to My Sister's a Therapist. I'm Virginia Jones. I'm a stand-up comedian. My sister, Laura Ryan, is a licensed marriage and family therapist. In our life, it's kind of crazy.
Hi, I'm Laura Ryan, licensed marriage and family therapist. But my main credit is sister to Jester of Jokes, Virginia Jones.
We are celebrating 1 year in podcast land, and we have enjoyed this year. We have reconnected with people from our lives. We have made new friends. It's been really cool and interesting. So everyone who's along on the journey with us, thank you for being here.
We love your emails.
We also love your reviews, but you know that.
But what I have really enjoyed is how much interaction we're getting from folks. All our podcast episodes coming up are ideas from listeners. So if you have a listener idea, just send us a quick email at hello@mysistersatherapist.com.
Yeah, our listeners are smart, they are thoughtful, and they have some cool ideas.
So Virginia, this week it's your topic. What are we talking about?
This episode is about vampires.
Okay. The psychology of vampires.
Yeah. What do vampires say about us? What do vampires say about our culture? What does it mean that we have vampires? All that stuff.
Are vampires real? Hey, here's a fun fact.
That's a great question.
I wrote a paper in 9th grade trying to prove that vampires are in fact real.
You know, Laura has a goth background that she doesn't always like to talk about, but there was a time when she was very, very goth.
I don't know if I was ever very goth. I've always been very spooky.
What was your main argument for vampires are real?
It's hard to remember. It has been a minute, but there's just so many historical references to vampirism that it must be real. My teacher disagreed and I got a C-.
Also, to everyone who was on Maury Povich saying I'm a real vampire because I drink blood, it takes a little more than that.
Yeah, I've been to New Orleans enough times to know that it takes a whole lot more than that.
A whole lot. Speaking of historical context, most cultures have some kind of a vampire. The Japanese have some great ones. There's the hopping vampire. There's the head that just detaches from the neck and has guts out of it, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I do know.
But one of the theories about early vampires in Europe was that it was a smokescreen for cannibalism because bodies would show up kind of chewed up in times of great poverty. But if people said, well, obviously I didn't eat Fred and you didn't eat Fred, so it must be some kind of a spooky vampire.
Oh, I see. So it's like covering my tracks. Okay.
Yeah. But also sometimes corpses would look like people did not expect them to. Your skin shrinks away so it looks like your teeth are growing and your nails are growing. Joe would die on Wednesday. We would look at his body on Friday and we're like, well, clearly his beard is a little longer. His nails are a little longer. And recession is another part of this discussion. There's also the possibility that vampire legend is a reaction to people with porphyria, which is a genetic disorder where your body has trouble producing heme from hemoglobin and you can become very sensitive to light. Some of the symptoms of porphyria are fragile skin, blisters, swelling, like really extreme sun reactions. You can also get muscle weakness, vomiting, constipation, and personality changes. So are vampires constipated?
That's a question I always ask myself.
They're not getting any fiber, like any.
Is that real? You can't get fiber from blood?
No, there's no fiber in blood. Blood is all protein.
Okay.
Some water. To defend themselves from vampires, some interesting things have happened. You would sever tendons at the knees of a corpse, which it's gross, but it doesn't really hurt anybody.
You're not speaking for the corpse, obviously.
Yes, it is molesting the dead. But at some point, people started putting poppy seeds or sand on the ground. This is my favorite vampire fact around the grave of someone who was thought to be a vampire because somewhere we decided that vampires had arithmomania, that they had to count stuff. Have you heard of that thing where if a vampire is chasing you, like you throw rice?
Yes, I have heard that.
Will have to stop and count all the pieces of rice.
So when you become a vampire, you also become Rain Man.
Yeah, you have OCD. But this is also why the Count from Sesame Street counts. It's because vampires have to count. So he's a counting count who counts. In the 14th, 15th century, vampires were not the debonair aristocratic creatures we think of them as today. That is a 19th century phenomenon. Before the 19th century, vampires were bloated, blood-colored monsters. Starting with the 1800s, we've got Verney the Vampire and Carmilla. The first vampire story was by Polidori that he wrote the same weekend as Frankenstein.
Oh, that's quite a weekend. What?
It was a really busy weekend. There's a not very good movie about it called Gothic. He wrote a story called The Vampire, and that idea generated more.
Where
books.
was he from? Was it Germany or France, or where was he from? Was he English?
I think it was English. I think they were all English. Yeah. He was a British, John William Polidori.
Okay.
So it was a weekend where him, Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, Stonecraft, who was Shelley's wife, and Lord Byron were all hanging out. And that's the weekend that gave us Frankenstein and the Vampire.
That's insane.
They were just hanging out in the countryside. And I guess they got tired of having orgies. So they said, well, what else can we do?
Let's take a break and write some stories about the undead.
Yeah, let me invent the horror genre. No
This weekend, was anyone else writing about zombies that weekend?
Great question. Vampires started getting sexy in the 1800s with Carmilla and Dracula, the idea of the sensuous aristocratic vampire. And this was compounded by filmmaking in the 1900s where people could see a vampire. Nosferatu is not particularly sexy, but of course, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, the icon, is very sexy. An interesting offshoot from the natural philosophy of the 19th century is people started trying to justify, was Jesus a vampire?
No, these are good questions.
How is Jesus different from a vampire?
I think because he doesn't live off of human blood.
So you think.
Okay. Circling back to the guy who wrote the first vampire novel, there was no vampire literature previous to that. Is that
Well,
correct?
previously there were folk stories.
Right. Okay.
Everybody knows about Vlad Dracul, ideas about him, Elizabeth Bathory, who was an aristocrat who would kill young women and bathe in their blood. But now Kim K does vampire facials out of her own blood. How are we so different?
That Bathory woman did lots of things. Curious, the man who wrote this short story, what made this different from anything that existed before?
It was the first time that you had a character who was a walking, talking, regular person who was killing other people.
I see. So it was the first kind of humanized vampire.
Humanized vampire, not a horrible monster who's eating your family.
Right.
But hey, we're at a party. You're cool. You're cool. Turns out he was a vampire, that kind of a thing.
So you might mistake him for a regular person.
Right. Because previously, the vampire was much more like a werewolf. You wouldn't see him. You would just see what was left behind. You would try to find the body and desecrate it so that it wouldn't continue performing violence. This is the first short story about a vampire and the first kind of horror short story in general. This stuff just wasn't, I guess, written down. You might ask yourself, we're pretty much done with desecrating corpses because of vampirism, but that's not so. In Malawi, in Africa, in 2002, mobs were stoning people, including their governor, Eric Chiwaya, based on the belief that the government was colluding with vampires. So now we've got a nice combo.
What I want to know is what evidence do they have that the government is not colluding with vampires?
I guess not at all. In 2017, it happened again. 6 people were accused of being vampires and killed in modern day Africa.
So this is like hot goss in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Here's where it gets to be us. There is a pop culture theory that vampires arising in pop culture can be a sign of an impending recession. In the 90s, we had a terrible recession. It coincided with the popularity of Interview with a Vampire. So it's not just these stories coming out, it's them getting crazy popular.
Right, because people are always writing about vampires.
Yes. And then in the 2000s, we had Twilight and True Blood with one of the worst recessions we've ever had. And now we've got the TV show Interview with a Vampire, Vampire Academy, First Kill, Vampire in the Garden, Let the Right One In, and Reginald the Vampire. What We Do in the Shadows is not considered part of this phenomenon because it is so good, it would have been successful whenever it happened. So Melanie McFarland wrote, "Beware the rise of vampire shows. It could mean a recession is looming."
There's other things that we also notice that lead us to believe that.
It's not just the vampires, but let's talk about why that is. Okay, so item 1, my question is, why are vampires rich? Are we assuming that they're just making really good investments?
I think if I've been alive for 500 years, if I start an investment brokerage
Own property, right?
500 years ago, yeah, it's just like intergenerational wealth, but it's just me.
Right. But also you have expenses. You're saving money on food. You don't buy clothes very much, but
I don't use much electricity. I'm sleeping all day.
And in the great vampire movie, Only Lovers Left Alive, Loki has rigged up a thing where he provides his own electricity. He's using a Tesla style getting electricity from the ground.
If you're a vampire, you might have access to that sort of technology.
And you've been alive a long time. You've had time to figure stuff out.
Exactly. So I sometimes feel like I've been in my career for 100 years. It's really only been around 20. But if I had 300 years to
Mhm.
perfect this, it would be incredible.
And all of your sessions would be like 2 minutes long. You would
Yeah,
have
I would,
someone
just
and
walk, I would walk in, I would smell them.
you'd
I
look
would
them up and
immediately
down
know.
and say, you got to stop talking to your mom. And then you'd walk out and they'd be cured.
That would be it. I wish if only it were that simple. It's a two-parter because the person actually has to listen to you. I have done that before. And
A-
then people
a
got mad
subtle-
at me and stopped coming in.
A subtle hint to people who Laura's currently seeing.
I'll give you for example. I met this woman. It was her first appointment. I don't even remember what our presenting issue was, but she just talked about her husband the whole time. He was an alcoholic. He didn't have a job. He was peeing on the floor and stuff. Like it was really not good. It was very bad.
That's not acceptable.
Correct. And so at the close of the session, I said, well, it really seems like you need to leave this person and start over. And she wrote me an email later and said, hey, I can't work with you because you don't support my marriage.
Because that was the thing she didn't want to do. She was coming to see you because she wanted you to fix him, not because she wanted to know that she needed to leave.
I think she wanted someone to complain to, but she didn't want me to hold her accountable for her part of that.
Back to literal vampires. He sounds like a real psychic vampire.
Right.
Dracula, the main tenet is he's buying property. That's the reason Jonathan Harker comes to his house in the first place. He's buying stuff. He owns a big property.
See, he understands the importance of real estate.
He's a landlord.
Dracula is my landlord. That's a good t-shirt.
In Interview the Vampire, Louis was born rich. He's the child of a plantation family. But in modern times, he and Lestat are insanely rich. He's building underground crypts in Dubai. He's crazy rich.
Of course, because it's two men, dual income. They're getting a man's income. They're doubling it. They have no
They're not.
children except for that little girl that they killed.
Oh, Claudia.
Claudia.
You better stay away from
Claudia.
the damned. Evidently,
Are not vampires because
they're not. They're not real vampires. But Dave Vanian read Interview with the Vampire and wrote a whole song about Claudia, the little girl vampire, portrayed in the film by Kristen Dunst.
That was actually the only good thing about that film, in my opinion.
I never saw it because that's how much I love the books.
I thought, I love the books.
Mhm.
I'm going to at least like the movie.
Anne Rice did not agree with the casting of Tom Cruise. And I'm like, I'm staying with Ian.
I
I'm
mean,
not going to see it.
I think she was correct. Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise? No.
This is a model where these guys are so rich, it doesn't matter what they do. They're not careful about their murders. They will
Much
just kill a room full of children and prostitutes and say, well, that was Tuesday.
It's a P. Diddy situation.
Exactly. Men who are so rich, they're protected. P. Diddy, as discussed in previous episode, Bill Cosby, Jeff Epstein, Jimmy Savile. But this has always happened. We have the Borgias, this Italian Renaissance family who are killing people, poisoning people, the Medicis. A lot of Italians doing scandals and crimes where they're like, we're rich, so it does not matter. Count Dracula, he's alone in his castle. He's feeding on peasants. So he's a symbol of aristocracy, the Ancien Regime. Voltaire in 1764 noticed how the mid-18th century coincided with the decline of the folklore of vampires. But now there were stock jobbers, brokers, men of business who sucked the blood of people in broad daylight. They were not dead, although corrupted. In 1764, Voltaire, who was a very smart person, was noticing that capitalism was a real vampire and it was sucking the blood out of people.
Accurate.
Karl Marx said, dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks.
I didn't realize that Karl Marx was a little poet. He wrote his little
He was-
shorty little poems for
A
himself.
little historical fiction for you. Werner Herzog, in his Nosferatu the Vampire, he uses this idea, presumably, when in his version, Jonathan Harker, a middle-class bourgeois person, becomes a vampire. The middle class becomes part of the aristocratic murdering class. He's just moving on up, as the Jeffersons said. Nosferatu is not a sexy vampire. He's very much based on this thing. Herzog's Nosferatu was Klaus Kinski, who was a very strange looking person, but also the father of Natasha Kinski.
She wasn't strange looking at all.
Unless strangely attractive, strangely slide into my DMs.
Is that happening? Do you have something to tell the
Hopefully.
audience about you and Natasha Kinski?
Guillermo del Toro did a movie called Crimson Peak that also has Loki in it. There's a big Tom Hiddleston theme here. But in that movie, the main characters are not literal vampires. But he has a pattern where he is marrying women, isolates them from their families, he gets their wealth, and then he kills them, doing the same thing that vampires do, justifying murdering innocents to keep his life going. Because he, I guess, can't do a job and also needs to sleep with his sister. Spoiler alert. That's what happens in Crimson Peak.
So you're giving a spoiler alert from a movie that's almost 10 years old.
I'm giving a spoiler alert. In case anyone has not seen Crimson Peak yet, go ahead and see it. He does sleep with his sister and he is murdering people. But like in the first part of the movie, he's set up like a vampire because he's this like romantic, dashing figure. He's a little bit mysterious. He's whistling in and out of town, but he is just justifying capitalism. The world is a vampire, as Billy Corgan said, but capitalism is a vampire. Landlords are vampires. Politicians are vampires. Wealthy people who no longer do work, but just profit over the work of others. They are the real vampires. So that is why vampire stories become popular as we're moving into recession, because people are under greater financial strain. The division between rich and poor becomes more stark. And so people relate to these stories. So it's not like a coinkydink. Zombie stories became very popular during quarantine. Walking Dead became insanely popular. It had been hot before. This idea of isolation and people out there out to get you and disease. And then when we got out of lockdown, like people still like The Walking Dead, but the cultural phenomenon waned. There'd been whole shows about it, like podcasts that were just about dissecting The Walking Dead. But the cultural force was at an end because we no longer related to that problem.
I'm glad, because that was a terrible time and I didn't enjoy it.
I didn't enjoy it.
I found myself becoming super obsessed with obviously being infected. And I just started feeling all the time that there were all these different ways that I could be infected. So even when masks came off and stuff, it was really tough. I would walk around and I could almost feel germs seeping into my skin.
Someone would cough and I think I could see little particles.
Droplets. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember when if you coughed in public, everyone would act like you were trying to kill them?
It's still like that, though. I had a coughing fit in the aisles of HEB recently, and this man looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. I think I would have died if looks could kill.
What do we know about vampires? We know that they used to be the scapegoat for murder, or at least cannibalism. But now that they've become very fancy and seductive, the modern vampire is seductive because that is what we are trained to like. People are like, wow, I wish I could be super rich. I wish I could be very well dressed. They have a kind of tuberculosic beauty that became popular in the 19th century.
Yeah, they're very Caucasian.
They're
heavy on the Caucasian.
In the new Interview with a Vampire, there is a BIPOC vampire, but he carries the story of being a minority. Even though he was a rich BIPOC person in New Orleans in the 19th century, it didn't help him that much moving through the centuries.
There's also a BIPOC character on What We Do in the Shadows, a nerd who works at 7-Eleven.
That's true. He's very, very sweet.
Do you remember the 1979 comedy horror Love at First Bite with George Hamilton?
Well, we were having a recession in the late 70s. We had problems with oil. We had budget deficits, all kinds of stuff. When the hilarious comedy Love at First Bite, how about a quickie with you? Always a donkey. That's the only thing I remember.
I don't remember anything about it except that there was a lot of disco. And I really think this is the only vampire movie with disco music and
let's
dancing.
talk about that. In 1985, we have Once Bitten, which I just rewatched because I like vampire movies and I have a weird obsession with movies made in 1980s Los Angeles. This one was mostly shot in the Valley, so it doesn't really qualify, but Lauren Hutton is a super glamorous vampire. But that was in 1985 and it was a comedy when we were not having financial problems. Love at First Bite is a comedy coming off the end of the 70s recession. So maybe in that way, What We Do in the Shadows is a positive harbinger because it's a comedy and it's popular now. It's not that vampire stuff doesn't come out all the time. The parallels of vampirism with addiction, the parallels of vampirism with sex and power, all that stuff. This stuff is made all the time. It's just that it becomes super popular when we're worried about the future and we're worried about money. Twilight. Every girl kid loved Twilight. at that
Girl
moment.
kid.
Speaking of trying to prove vampires existing, I had just learned there's a math problem that the end of the math problem is basically you can't have vampires, because even if a vampire only created another vampire once a year, that would compound. One day, half of everybody would be a vampire, and the next day, everybody would be a vampire. So vampires are mathematically not possible, or at least not in big numbers.
Maybe vampires are just very lazy and they're not producing that much.
I went to a party with this fact, and it was when the books were out, but before the movie was out. But there was a Twilight girl who was really PO'd that I told her that vampires weren't real because she was an Edward Cullen fan.
Just because the math doesn't
And-
math doesn't mean that vampires aren't real. I don't remember names or dates, but I do remember
Feelings.
for our sister's bachelorette party, we booked a ghost vampire tour and we walked around New Orleans and went to all these places. But the one I remembered was this guy who basically lived in New Orleans. People suspected he was a vampire. He ran away. Maybe 50, 60 years later, came back again, this time pretending to be his own nephew.
Jacques de Saint-Germain.
Yeah, he came back as his own nephew and he was doing pretty well. And his house was very stark. It didn't have any furnishings really. And before these parties, he had some rugs and stuff, but they would pull all the rugs up, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And it would just be
Have a
these
party.
big empty warehouses, basically. And he was never seen eating. He was always drinking some sort of drink that he wouldn't let anyone have. And a woman jumped from a 3rd-story window and told the police that he had tried to kill her. So they were looking through his house. They were trying to find evidence and clues. There's blood everywhere, basically. They found a bunch of rugs with blood on them in places. But one of the cops, because he definitely wasn't crooked, went down in the wine cellar, helped himself to a bottle, opened it up, took a sip, and immediately spat it out because it was blood mixed with absinthe.
Yeah, because you can't just put blood in bottles. And I want everyone to remember that because it will congeal. And what you're going to have is a scab in a bottle. And then you're going to have to get like an ice pick, and that's going to be no good.
What am I going to do with this giant bottle-shaped scab?
Right. What I remember about that story is that the girl went to the cops and they came back to his house and he was gone.
Yeah, he's off with the wind.
So he's probably a real vampire. Laura, in the world of psychology and therapy, isn't a vampire the ultimate narcissist?
I think a vampire is probably a sociopath.
Yeah. Imagine having the belief that your life was so important, that it was so important that you continue and that you continue in your ideal form, that the cost of killing people was acceptable.
I guess I think of it because I think the Lestat books were sort of my intro to vampirism. The story that I make up about vampires is that a lot of them didn't have a choice.
If you're Louis, vampirism happens to you. And in Interview of the Vampire, he for years refuses to kill people and he only wants to live on the blood of dogs and rats and stuff.
Yeah.
And Lestat makes fun of him and says, we're the apex predators. It's our job to kill these people. And that's kind of an Elon Musk style tech bro idea. We are the superiors of these underlings and we can kill them if we want. It doesn't matter.
Right. I also feel like vampires are not human, so I can't really apply the laws of therapy to vampires.
But they used to be.
But if I was a human 500 years ago,
Right.
do I even know what a human is? I just went to the gym for the first time in a year and a half, and I didn't really
You didn't know what
remember.
the gym was.
I didn't really even know how to get the door open.
Taking yourself out of the human lifespan would change your experience of the human experience. Because this is a story in many, many vampire books is you can't really be friends with humans because they die. In Only Lovers Left Alive, Loki calls them zombies and he's friends with one of them and he doesn't hate humanity, but they make him sad because he's seen so many people rise and fall, so many great thinkers, so many artists. He's seen their work ignored during their lifetime and then picked up later. Like he's seen all the trends.
That would be a move, is to be a vampire art collector.
That would be an amazing move. You wouldn't even have to know what was good. You would just have to get a lot of it and a certain percentage of it is going to really evaluate.
Right, you're always going to do well because even mediocre artists, if you keep something for 300 years, it becomes worth something.
Even if it's just like, hey, he knew Matisse. They were friends.
He and Edvard Munch were
Mhm.
chilling hard.
Vampires' attitudes towards people on the good side, the best possible scenario, they think that we're kind of like cute babies.
Because we are in their world.
By the time we get to any sort of understanding of ourselves and the world we live in, we die.
Well, it's interesting because as a approaching 50-year-old person, I also feel this way when I work with young people. I had an 18-year-old in my office recently. And I just thought, oh, buddy, there's so much going on in the world and you have no idea. You're on the very precipice of the first chapter of your life. And I've seen it all.
When I was an unhappy suburban kid from a broken home, I really wanted to be a vampire, really related to that idea. I really was interested in it. And I think I was attracted to the power and the independence. But thinking about it, I was like, I don't want to be a vampire because you would get so terribly bored.
I always think about being lonely. Everybody I love is gone. Everything that I relate to. This is also how I feel when I talk to Gen Z.
Young people, you want to have a good conversation about mimeographs or magnetic cassette tape, and they're not going to be able to help you.
Why is it always technology? I want to talk about the band Aha or possibly what MTV used to be like when it was actually music. The kids today, I think I would just feel completely left behind. I never wanted to be a vampire. I wanted to be more of like a Bunnicula type situation. For those of you who haven't yet read Bunnicula,
spoiler alert, it's a bunny who's a vampire.
Right. The celery stalks at midnight. Oh, wow. That's classic. Classic Bunnicula. See, that's the sad thing about you and me is we would end up being kind of in Bunnicula situations.
Vegetarians.
We're both vegetarians. So we get to live forever, but we'd be sucking on celery.
I could totally do that.
Speaking of disappointing vampire things, I was so disappointed when Dracula came out because I had just finished the book. Just imagine what it would be like if you'd read the book 100 years ago and now you have to see Keanu Reeves doing this corny junk.
When you talk about loneliness, that's the crux of Interview with a Vampire. Louis hates Lestat, but he has to hang out with him because he's the only person who can relate to his experience.
There's nobody who's going to understand him. Because I think that's the other thing. You can't just walk around and tell people stuff. If I'm a wolf, I'm not going to be hanging out with rabbits.
We've talked about it before. Everybody talks about the wisdom of age. You may not be getting smarter, but you have had enough experiences that you have figured some things out. Being a vampire would be that times 1,000.
Because you're amassing knowledge. I brought up the idea of weaponized incompetence this week with somebody, and they looked at me like I was talking from the moon. A vampire. And it's one of the 8 million things that I've learned from TikTok. Being a vampire is probably like watching TikTok 24/7 for about 50 years.
But also, culture must move so quickly for them. Vampires are still working on doing the renegade dance, and that's over.
That's so over.
There's so much information. There's so much new information all the time. To answer the TikTok that you sent me, that the creator doesn't know that we're doing this podcast.
They might know. You never know. We might be famous by the time this comes out.
Cross fingers. I don't think that there's anything mystical about the relationship of vampire stuff and financial hardship. It's not a coincidence that times of recession are marked with times of popularity of the vampire myth. Because when you are noticing that your money is not going as far, that you're working harder, but you have less than you had before, you're just more aware of the division between the 1% and you, and of the predatory practice of the upper class, that you are being victimized. Your job is literally sucking the life out of you. Capitalism is a trap. Patriarchy exists to promote and feed capitalism. The only reason people want you to have children is to make workers. Let's get out in the streets, everybody. Laura, as we wrap up, what are your last thoughts on this topic?
Vampires are weird. They're not human. The story that I make up about what vampires feel like, to me, they feel like a harbinger of doom. They're unstoppable. They never die. It's very hard to kill them. There's some specific ways you can do it, especially if it's a Twilight vampire. They can be out in the sun. I feel like, to me, it's the feeling of being prey to a predator. And I think for me personally, as we enter end stage capitalism, I feel much more like prey than an equal to the upper class.
So you feel helpless.
Yeah, I feel like there's nothing I can do. They got this sweatshirt that says the only dangerous minority is the rich.
That'll show them.
I think I am showing them. I bought it from Jeff Bezos.
The irony.
At least how I felt lately is no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, no matter what I produce, no matter how good I am at my job, I cannot get ahead. I went to Target because my child is growing at an exponential rate.
We really wanted to stop, but he won't.
He's basically gone from the size of a regular 8-year-old to the size of a 25-year-old in basically 6 months.
Yeah.
we tried on the winter clothes and nothing fits. So I had to buy him a whole new wardrobe yesterday, and it was $400 at Target. I understand why. That's my perspective. I think I feel like when I see vampires, I see rich white men with unending power and the ability to stay alive forever and continue to ruin my life and the lives of my peers.
And they never struggle with their weight because all they're eating is blood. And you cannot get fat on blood. That's the whole core of the Atkins diet.
Well, that man died from a heart attack. So it turned out it wasn't the greatest decision ever.
Don't write us letters about that.
So, Virginia, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
That when we want to say, I'm being oppressed by the rich, the blood is being slowly drained out of me by my job and my position in life, but we don't know how to say it, we say, I would like to watch a vampire movie. It's speaking to how we feel. We are Jonathan Harker, slowly being mesmerized, hypnotized, being put under someone else's control.
If you're in my office, you are.
And unable to do anything about it.
Right. So, Virginia, if somebody wanted to follow you on social media and find out more about your humor, comedy and humor,
That's
your
how you say
humor.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And my friend this week, I discovered, much to my chagrin, that she doesn't know how to say charcuterie.
What was she saying?
She was just really struggling. She's like, charcuterie? Anyway, now I've learned that I don't know how to say comedian. So, Virginia, if somebody wants to follow your comedy career and learn more about you, how would they do that?
You can find out everything about me at www.badinia.com, BADINIA. That is also my TikTok and my Instagram. If you would like to write us, you can write us at hello@mysistersatherapist.com. You can also text us directly through Apple Podcasts, which is kind of slick. If you would like to hire us to speak at your daughter's wedding, your Arbor Day celebration, at the opening of your car dealership, you can write us at hireus@mysistersatherapist.com. Laura, where can people find you if they wish to on the internet?
They can find me at my professional website, lauraryan.org. They can also find me at my very unprofessional TikTok account, I am Laura Ryan. If they want to follow us on social medias, they can go to My Sister's a Therapist Instagram page, or they can go to our website, mysistersatherapist.com.
Awesome. Laura, now is the part of the podcast where you sometimes read a review that a generous person has made for us on Apple, which we really like a lot when people do.
And if they don't, then they're basically bad people.
And if they don't, they're bad people. Laura, do you have a review to share with us?
In fact, I do. It's from Calvin Sexton, who gave us 5 stars on Apple. I love this podcast. Very informative and helpful. Laura and Virginia have a great rapport, and the way that they deliver information is both entertaining and fun. I have already learned so much. Thank you, Calvin.
Thank you, Calvin. And closing, in the words of Billy Ray Valentine, Capricorn, we can make it, baby.
Me and you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.